Michael Carter had no hidden fortune, no wealthy relatives waiting to leave him millions, and no secret invention that would one day make him rich. He was just a carpenter, with rough hands, worn-out boots, and a small workshop that barely earned enough to keep the lights on. But when his ex-wife returned in a luxury car and announced that she was taking their daughter away because love doesn't pay the bills, Michael faced the greatest battle of his life. She had money, powerful lawyers, and a billionaire husband standing beside her. He had nothing but his daughter, his reputation, and a heart that refused to give up. What nobody expected was that the man they called a failure had already built something far more valuable than wealth. One act of kindness at a time, he had changed the lives of dozens of lost teenagers, struggling families, and forgotten people in his community. And when the fight for his daughter reached its breaking point, an entire town would rise to defend the father who had spent years quietly saving everyone else. Because sometimes the richest man in the room is not the one with the biggest bank account, but the one whose character has become the foundation of countless lives. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories about courage, fatherhood, and the power of ordinary people inspire you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for this unforgettable journey. The sound of a hammer echoed through the small workshop as the first rays of morning sunlight slipped through the dusty windows. Michael Carter wiped the sweat from his forehead and stepped back to admire the dining table he had spent nearly 3 days building. The oak surface gleamed softly beneath the light, every edge carefully sanded by his own hands. It wasn't a luxury piece that would ever appear in a designer showroom, and it certainly wasn't worth a fortune, but it was honest work. For Michael, that mattered more than anything. He glanced at the old wall clock. It was 7:12 a.m. In less than 20 minutes, he would drive his daughter to school, the part of the day he looked forward to most. His workshop stood on the edge of Rosewood, a quiet town where everyone seemed to know each other's stories. The building itself wasn't impressive. The paint had faded years ago, the roof leaked during heavy storms, and most of the machines were older than some of the customers who walked through the door. Yet to Michael, the workshop represented freedom, dignity, and the ability to provide for his daughter through honest labor. Suddenly, the office door burst open. "Dad!" a cheerful voice called out. Michael instantly smiled. Lily ran into the workshop wearing her school uniform, a piece of toast still in one hand. "You're going to be late," Michael teased. "I'm not late," she replied. "You said that yesterday, and I wasn't late yesterday. You were 7 minutes late." Lily rolled her eyes dramatically. "That's not really late," Michael laughed. "Tell that to your teacher." Lily grinned and picked up a safety mask from the workbench. "Can I help sand something after school?" she asked hopefully. Michael pretended to think. Dad. Dad. Maybe. Dad." Michael finally laughed. "Okay." Lily pumped her fist into the air. "Yes." Michael pointed a finger at her. "Homework first." She groaned dramatically. "You're ruining my life. That's literally my job as a parent." The two laughed together, and for a brief moment, everything felt perfect. Simple. Peaceful. Enough. Neither of them noticed the black luxury SUV slowly turning onto the road outside the workshop. The vehicle rolled to a stop in front of the building. Michael's smile faded immediately. He recognized the car. A knot formed in his stomach. Lily followed his gaze through the window, and her expression changed too. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. Elegant, confident, impeccably dressed. Victoria Hayes, Michael's ex-wife, Lily's mother. 3 years earlier, Victoria had walked away from their marriage. At first, she claimed she needed space. Then she claimed she needed independence. A few months later, she married Richard Hayes, one of the wealthiest real estate developers in the state. Michael had never begged her to stay. Some things couldn't be fixed, especially when someone's heart had already left long before they packed their bags. Victoria rarely visited these days. Birthdays, occasional holidays, and carefully scheduled weekends were usually the extent of her involvement. That was why her sudden appearance felt deeply unsettling. Lily's excitement disappeared. "What is she doing here?" she asked quietly. Michael didn't answer because he honestly didn't know. Victoria crossed the gravel driveway in expensive high heels that seemed completely out of place around sawdust and workbenches. The workshop door opened. The scent of expensive perfume immediately replaced the smell of freshly cut wood. Michael slowly set down his tools. "Victoria." "Michael." The greeting felt cold and formal, like two strangers forced into the same room. Victoria's eyes swept across the workshop. She examined the aging machines, the worn wooden floor, the patched ceiling, and the faded walls. The expression on her face wasn't anger, it was disappointment, as if she couldn't understand why Michael was still living this way. Lily stood quietly beside her father. Victoria offered a small smile. "Hello, sweetheart. Hi, Mom." The conversation died almost immediately. The distance between them was impossible to ignore. Victoria cleared her throat. "We need to talk." Instantly, Michael's instincts warned him that nothing good was about to happen. "About what?" he asked. "Somewhere private." Michael glanced toward Lily. "It's okay," Victoria replied. "She'll know soon enough anyway." A heavy silence filled the room. Michael felt his pulse quicken. "What are you talking about?" Victoria folded her arms and delivered the sentence that changed everything. "I'm filing for full custody." For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Lily stared at her mother in shock. Michael felt the air leave his lungs. "What?" Victoria remained calm. "I've already started the process." Lily's eyes widened. "What do you mean full custody?" Victoria turned toward her daughter. "It means you'll be living with me." "No." The answer came instantly, without hesitation, without uncertainty. Victoria sighed. "You don't understand yet. I understand perfectly. Lily, I don't want to leave Dad." Michael gently placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. He could feel her trembling. Victoria's expression hardened. "This isn't about what you want right now." Michael finally found his voice. "Why are you doing this?" Victoria looked directly at him. "Because she's getting older. And she deserves opportunities." Michael frowned. "What opportunities?" Victoria slowly gestured around the workshop. "This." Michael felt something tighten inside his chest. This what? This life. The words hung in the air like a blade. Sharp, deliberate, cruel. Victoria continued. "Look around, Michael. You work 12 hours a day. Your business is barely surviving. This building is falling apart. And Lily deserves better." Michael's jaw tightened. Victoria stepped closer. "She deserves the best schools. She already has a good school. Elite schools. She doesn't need elite schools. She deserves security." Michael let out a bitter laugh. "You mean money?" Victoria didn't deny it, because money was exactly what she meant. At that moment, another figure appeared in the doorway. Richard Hayes, tall, wealthy, impeccably dressed. The billionaire husband, the man who seemed to possess everything Michael didn't. Richard glanced around the workshop and smirked. "So this is where you've been raising her?" Michael immediately disliked the tone. Richard continued. "No offense, Michael, but children need more than sawdust and good intentions." Lily instinctively moved closer to her father. Michael felt anger rising inside him, not because they were insulting him, but because they were treating his daughter like a possession that could simply be upgraded. Victoria opened a folder. Inside were legal documents. Michael recognized them instantly. Custody papers. His heart sank. "This isn't necessary," he said quietly. "It is," Victoria replied. "The court will decide." Michael stared at the documents and then at his daughter. Lily looked terrified. The workshop suddenly felt smaller than it ever had before. Victoria's final words cut deeper than everything else she had said that morning. She looked directly at Michael and asked, "What exactly can you offer her here besides hard work and struggle?" The question echoed through the workshop. Michael slowly looked down at his rough hands. Hands covered in scars. Hands that had built furniture, repaired homes, carried his daughter when she was sick, and comforted her whenever she cried. For the first time in years, he wondered if those hands would be enough, because the battle ahead would not be fought with wood and nails. It would be fought with lawyers, money, influence, and power. And Michael Carter had almost none of those things. As Victoria and Richard walked back toward their luxury SUV, Lily wrapped her arms tightly around her father's waist. Michael held her close, but as he watched the vehicle disappear down the road, a terrifying realization settled over him. The people he was about to fight had unlimited resources. And for the first time in his life, being a good father might not be enough. For a long time after the SUV disappeared down the road, Michael remained standing in the middle of the workshop. The silence felt heavier than any noise he had ever heard. Lily still clung to his side, refusing to let go, as if she feared someone might come back and take her away at any moment. Michael looked down at his daughter and forced a small smile. "Everything will be okay," he said. But the words felt hollow, even as they left his mouth. Lily searched his face. "Promise?" she asked quietly. Michael hesitated for the briefest moment before nodding. "I promise." He hated lying to her. The truth was that he had no idea what would happen next. Over the following weeks, life became a blur of stress, paperwork, and sleepless nights. Every morning Michael woke before sunrise, worked in the workshop all day, picked Lily up from school, helped her with homework, made dinner, and then stayed awake late into the night trying to understand legal documents spread across his kitchen table. Every page seemed to remind him of the same thing. Victoria had resources. She had expensive lawyers. She had money. She had influence. Michael had none of those things. One evening he sat across from a family attorney who had agreed to meet him at a discounted rate. The lawyer reviewed the documents and slowly removed his glasses. "I'll be honest with you," he said. Michael already knew he wasn't going to like what came next. The court will consider many factors, but financial stability carries weight. Michael stared at the desk. "So, because she's rich, she wins?" The attorney sighed. "That's not what I'm saying. But you'll need strong evidence that remaining with you is in Lily's best interest." Michael looked down at his rough hands. "And how exactly do I prove that?" The attorney didn't have a simple answer. As bills continued piling up, business at the workshop slowed. Several customers delayed payments. One large order was cancelled entirely. The pressure seemed to come from every direction at once. Some nights, Michael sat alone in the workshop after Lily had gone to bed, staring at unfinished furniture and wondering whether he was about to lose the most important person in his life. One rainy evening, after working later than usual, Michael locked the front door and prepared to leave when he heard a strange noise coming from the back storage room. At first, he assumed it was a raccoon. The old building occasionally attracted unwanted visitors. He grabbed a flashlight and slowly walked toward the sound. "Hello?" he called out. No answer. The noise came again. Michael pushed open the storage room door and shined the flashlight into the darkness. A frightened teenage boy stared back at him. The boy looked no older than 17. His clothes were dirty, his face was pale, his eyes immediately filled with panic. "Please don't call the police," the boy blurted out. Michael lowered the flashlight. The teenager sat in the corner surrounded by old boxes and unused lumber. A small backpack rested beside him. "When was the last time you ate?" Michael asked. The boy looked confused by the question. "What? When was the last time you had a meal?" The teenager hesitated. "Yesterday morning." Michael stared at him. The answer told him everything he needed to know. 20 minutes later, the two sat across from each other at a small table inside a diner owned by Rosa Martinez, the elderly woman who ran the restaurant across the street from the workshop. Rosa raised an eyebrow when she saw Michael walk in with the teenager. "Friend of yours?" she asked. "Not yet," Michael replied. The boy looked embarrassed as Rosa placed a plate of food in front of him. "Eat." The teenager hesitated for less than 2 seconds before devouring the meal. Rosa and Michael exchanged a glance. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Both had seen hunger before. After the meal, Michael finally learned the boy's name, Ethan Brooks. His mother had died 2 years earlier. His father had disappeared long before that. He had bounced between shelters, temporary homes, and the streets ever since. "No one wants to hire a kid with no address," Ethan said quietly. Michael nodded. He understood. Life could be brutally unfair. The next morning, Ethan returned to the workshop. Michael wasn't surprised. The teenager stood awkwardly near the entrance. "I just wanted to say thanks." Michael pointed toward a pile of scrap wood. "Ever used a sander?" Ethan blinked. "No. You want to learn?" The boy looked genuinely shocked. "Why?" Michael shrugged. "Because someone taught me once." That simple conversation changed both of their lives. Over the next few weeks, Ethan began spending every afternoon at the workshop. Michael taught him how to measure wood properly, how to operate machinery safely, and how to build furniture piece by piece. At first, Ethan made mistakes constantly. Crooked cuts, incorrect measurements, wasted materials. But Michael never yelled. He never insulted him. He simply showed him how to improve. For perhaps the first time in his life, Ethan had someone who believed in him. Word slowly spread. A week later, another teenager stopped by. Then another. Then another. Some came looking for work. Others came looking for food. A few simply wanted somewhere safe to spend the afternoon. Michael never planned to start anything. He simply kept helping whoever walked through the door. Soon, the back corner of the workshop transformed into something unexpected. Old tables became workstations, shelves filled with donated tools. Community members occasionally dropped off supplies after hearing what Michael was doing. One afternoon, Lily walked into the workshop after school and stopped in surprise. Half a dozen teenagers were working together on various projects. "What happened?" she asked. Michael smiled. "I'm not entirely sure." Lily watched Ethan patiently helping a younger boy learn how to use a measuring tape. For the first time in weeks, she saw her father genuinely smile. The sight made her smile too. That evening, Rosa crossed the street, carrying a tray of sandwiches. She looked around at the busy workshop and laughed. "You know this place is turning into something much bigger than a woodworking shop, right?" Michael wiped sawdust from his hands. "I can barely keep the lights on." Rosa pointed toward the teenagers. "That's not what I'm talking about." Michael followed her gaze. The young people laughed as they worked together. Some had arrived angry. Some had arrived scared. Some had arrived completely lost. Yet somehow, they all seemed different now. A little more confident. A little more hopeful. Rosa smiled softly. "Most people spend their lives building furniture." Michael looked confused. "And?" She nodded toward the room. "You're building people." For the first time in months, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced since Victoria filed for custody. Hope. He still didn't know how he was going to fight the legal battle ahead. He still didn't know whether he could keep Lily with him. But as he watched Ethan teach another teenager how to hold a tool correctly, he realized something important. Money wasn't the only thing a person could leave behind. And Without realizing it, Michael Carter had already begun creating a different kind of legacy. A legacy that would soon become far more powerful than anyone imagined. The workshop no longer felt like the lonely place it had been just a few months earlier. Every afternoon, the sound of hammers, saws, and laughter filled the building from wall to wall. What had once been a struggling woodworking shop was slowly becoming something entirely different. Michael still spent most of his day building furniture and completing customer orders, but now he was also teaching, mentoring, and guiding a growing group of young people who had nowhere else to go. At first, there had only been Ethan. Then came 2 more teenagers, then 5, then 10. Some arrived after hearing about the free woodworking lessons. Others simply followed friends who told them there was a place where nobody judged them. Many came from broken homes. Some had already dropped out of school. A few were dangerously close to joining gangs or falling into crime. Yet every one of them found the same thing when they entered Michael's workshop: respect. Michael never asked where they came from. He never demanded explanations. He never treated them like problems that needed fixing. Instead, he treated them like people. And for many of them, that simple act changed everything. One afternoon, a 16-year-old boy named Tyler accidentally ruined an expensive piece of oak that Michael had been preparing for a customer. The boy froze in terror as he stared at the damaged wood. "I'm sorry," Tyler whispered. "I'm so sorry." Michael walked over and examined the mistake. The entire piece was unusable. Several hours of work had been lost. The workshop became completely silent. The teenagers waited for Michael to explode. Instead, he simply nodded. "Good." Tyler blinked. "What?" Michael pointed at the ruined board. "Now you've learned something." Tyler looked confused. "You aren't mad?" Michael smiled. "Nobody learns without making mistakes." The boy stared at him. "I just cost you money." Michael placed a hand on his shoulder. "And one day you'll teach someone else not to make the same mistake." The tension immediately disappeared. Several teenagers exchanged surprised glances. Most adults in their lives had only ever screamed at them when they failed. Michael was different. Later that evening, Lily sat beside her father while they swept sawdust from the floor. "Why don't you get angry?" she asked. Michael leaned on the broom. "I do get angry." "No, not like other people." Michael thought for a moment. "Because most people already know when they've messed up. They don't need someone to remind them. They need someone to help them do better next time." Lily quietly absorbed the lesson. Without realizing it, she was learning far more than woodworking inside that old shop. She was learning what kind of person her father truly was. As the weeks passed, small miracles began happening throughout the community. Ethan earned enough money helping with projects to rent a small room instead of sleeping in shelters. Tyler returned to school after nearly a year away. Another teenager, named Marcus, stopped hanging around a local gang and started spending every afternoon in the workshop instead. Parents who had once worried about their children suddenly noticed dramatic changes. Teachers noticed improved grades. Police officers noticed fewer incidents involving troubled teenagers. People began asking the same question: what exactly is happening inside Michael Carter's workshop? The answer was surprisingly simple. Someone was finally giving these young people a reason to believe in themselves. One Saturday morning, Rosa walked into the workshop carrying several boxes of food. The place was packed. Teenagers worked on chairs, bookshelves, tables, and small repair projects. Rosa shook her head in amazement. "I remember when this place was almost empty." Michael laughed. "Some days I miss the quiet." "No, you don't. You're right." Rosa pointed toward the teenagers. "Do they pay you?" Michael shook his head. "No." "Then why do you spend so much time teaching them?" Michael glanced around the room. For several moments he said nothing. Finally, he answered, "Because somebody gave me a chance when I was young." Rosa smiled. And now you're giving it back? Michael nodded. That's how it's supposed to work. The elderly woman studied him carefully. You know, most people would charge money for this. Michael shrugged. Most of these kids don't have money. Exactly, he smiled. Then charging them would defeat the purpose. Meanwhile, the legal battle continued moving forward. Victoria's attorneys submitted more paperwork. Court dates were scheduled. Evaluations were arranged. Every letter that arrived in the mailbox brought fresh anxiety. Some nights Michael sat alone at the kitchen table after Lily went to bed, staring at legal documents and wondering whether any of this would be enough. Because no matter how much good happened in the workshop, Victoria still had advantages he couldn't match. She lived in a mansion. She could provide private schools, luxury vacations, exclusive opportunities. Michael often wondered whether a judge would look at those things and decide they mattered more than love. One evening, while he was lost in thought, Lily quietly sat down beside him. She looked at the stack of custody papers. "Are you scared?" she asked. Michael considered lying. Instead, he chose honesty. "A little," Lily nodded. "So am I." Michael reached for her hand. The two sat together in silence. Finally, Lily looked up at him. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." The young girl smiled softly. "When my friends talk about their parents, they usually talk about what they bought them." Michael listened carefully. "But when I talk about you, I talk about who you are." Michael felt his throat tighten. Lily continued. "My friends think rich people are impressive." She squeezed his hand. "I think you're impressive." For several seconds, Michael couldn't speak. Those simple words carried more value than any paycheck he had ever received. Across town, however, Victoria was preparing her next move. Inside her enormous home, she reviewed reports with her attorneys, while Richard sat nearby. Everything appeared to be going according to plan. The financial comparisons heavily favored her. The legal strategy looked strong. Yet one detail continued bothering Victoria. Lily wasn't pulling away from Michael. If anything, she seemed closer to him than ever. Richard noticed her concern. "You're overthinking this." Victoria looked up. "What if she doesn't want to leave him?" Richard leaned back confidently. "She's a child." Victoria remained silent. Richard smiled. "Once she experiences everything we can offer, she'll understand." But deep down, Victoria wasn't completely sure, because despite all the money, luxury, and opportunities surrounding her, there was something inside Michael's small workshop that couldn't be purchased. Something people seemed naturally drawn toward. Something powerful. Something real. Back at the workshop, Michael locked the front door late one evening and looked around the room. The benches were covered with unfinished projects. The shelves held tools donated by local residents. Photographs from community events had begun appearing on the walls. Most importantly, the workshop was filled with signs of life, signs of hope, signs of purpose. Ethan approached before leaving for the night. "Hey, Michael." "Yeah?" The teenager hesitated. Then he said something Michael would never forget. "You know you saved my life, right?" Michael immediately shook his head. "No, you saved your own life." Ethan smiled. "Maybe." Then he looked around the workshop. "But you gave me a reason to try." After Ethan left, Michael stood alone in the quiet building. For the first time since the custody battle began, he realized something important. Even if he lost everything tomorrow, his life had already mattered. Not because of money, not because of success, but because he had helped people become better versions of themselves. What Michael didn't realize was that every act of kindness, every lesson, every second chance he had given away was quietly planting seeds throughout the community. And very soon, those seeds would begin to grow into something far bigger than anyone could imagine. 1 year later, the small woodworking shop on the edge of Rosewood looked completely different. The faded building still stood in the same place. The roof still needed repairs from time to time. The machines were still old, but the heart of the workshop had grown into something extraordinary. What began with one struggling father and one homeless teenager had become a community training center that helped dozens of young people every year. Former students now returned to teach new ones. Some had started businesses of their own. Others had graduated from trade schools. A few had become community leaders, and every one of them knew exactly where their second chance had begun. Michael Carter never became a millionaire. He never inherited a secret fortune. He never built $1 billion company. Yet somehow he had become one of the most respected men in Rosewood, not because of what he owned, but because of what he gave away. On a warm summer afternoon, Michael stood outside the workshop, watching a new group of teenagers carry lumber into the building. Laughter echoed through the yard. Conversations filled the air. Life was everywhere. Beside him stood Lily, now a little older and a little taller. A visitor passing by pointed toward Michael and asked, "Who is that man?" Lily smiled proudly before answering, "That's my dad." The visitor nodded. "He must be important." Lily looked at her father for a moment, then she smiled even wider. "He is." Across the street, Rosa watched from her diner window. Ethan was inside the workshop, teaching a younger student how to use a measuring tape. The same lesson Michael had once taught him. The cycle was continuing. One act of kindness had become many. One helping hand had created hundreds more. Michael looked around at everything that had grown from the simple decision to care about people when nobody else would. And in that moment, he finally understood something that money could never buy. A person's true wealth is measured not by what they keep, but by what they leave behind in the lives of others. The greatest inheritance a father can give his child is not land, money, or possessions. It is character. It is compassion. It is the example of a life lived with purpose. Michael Carter had never won because he was richer. He had won because he was loved. And that love had become stronger than wealth, stronger than status, and stronger than any courtroom battle. As the sun slowly set over Rosewood, the workshop doors remained open, welcoming anyone who needed guidance, hope, or a second chance. And while Michael Carter may have been an ordinary working man, the legacy he built would outlive every fortune, every mansion, and every bank account. Because long after money disappears, people never forget the person who believed in them when nobody else did. Sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear expensive suits, own private jets, or live in mansions. Sometimes they're ordinary fathers who wake up before sunrise, work with their hands, and spend their lives putting their children and their community before themselves. Michael Carter never became rich, never discovered a hidden fortune, and never needed a miracle to save him. Instead, he proved that the strongest foundation a person can build is trust, kindness, and the willingness to help others when they need it most. His story reminds us that true success isn't measured by the size of a bank account, but by the lives we touch along the way. Long after money is spent and possessions are forgotten, people remember those who believed in them, encouraged them, and gave them a second chance when no one else would. If this story inspired you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes that love, character, and integrity still matter. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next unforgettable story.
Thank you for watching my video.